Selection technically starts when applications have been received. Which of the applicants will be chosen, by what process, and by whom? One challenge in selection is that the political appointment from a patronage is simply the preliminary selection method for most senior government positions. Another irony is that although public sector selection is primarily an open application of merit principles, selection for many positions is determined largely by internally based hiring. Yet another paradox or tension lies in the promotion of merit principles with robust testing and the introduction of more flexibility in testing, sometimes at the expense of thoroughness. Although participation in the selection process has always been a significant role for managers and supervisors, that role has expanded with the dramatic downsizing of human resource departments throughout government. The challenge is that the scope and depth of responsibilities have grown over the past generation. Indeed, historical eras of human resource management are largely defined by the underlying philosophy of selection. There are essentially 7 possible criteria that can be used, separately or in combination, to provide the basis for selection decisions. First, electoral popularity. Second, social class. Third, patronage. Fourth, merit. Fifth, seniority. Sixth, representativeness. And 7, character and job fit. All of these, except for social class, are explicitly used in various arenas of the public sector. Although the terms civil service and merit are often used synonymously, in common practice, civil service is a broader term because it embraces elements of seniority and representativeness as well as merit. Electoral popularity is the basis of representative democracy. Citizens vote for those who they think that are doing a good job or will do a good job. What types of positions are reserved for the electoral popularity model? First and foremost, they are policy-making jobs in which responsibilities include crafting laws and defining the broad administrative missions of national, state, and local governments. Such offices occupy the legislative bodies of all levels of government: Congress, state legislatures, county boards of supervisors, city councils, and boards and townships, school districts, and special units. Social class selection, the antithesis of democratic selection, is generally illegal as an explicit selection philosophy in the United States. Patronage encompasses a broad class of selection decisions in which a single person is responsible for designating officials or employees without a requirement for a formalized application process. Such appointments may or may not be subject to confirmation procedures. Merit-based systems emphasize technical qualifications using processes that analyze job competencies and require open application procedures. Merit selection is the primary philosophy for civil service systems that dominate non-executive employment. The pursuit of a precise and valid indicator of merit is challenging for those who must consider what tests to use and how much weight to give them. Seniority is also a critical selection principle in civil service systems. Systems that emphasize seniority either limit many job searches or internal candidates or give internal candidates substantial advantages in the process. The effects are that civil service employment occurs primarily in selected entry-level positions and that external hiring is less common at the supervisory level and above. The selection principle of representativeness can be interpreted in a number of ways, including by geography, social class, gender, race or ethnicity, prior military service, and disability. Generally speaking, affirmative action tries to encourage women and minorities to seek positions for which they're qualified, especially where the rate of employment of members of their group is low. Even though a person has the right education and technical qualifications, he or she may not be a good fit, a loose concept that refers to a match of the expectations of the person with those of the job and the organization. Character fit involves fit in regard to generic work habits such as conscientiousness, motivation, initiative, resilience, service motivation, and self-discipline. Job fit concerns specific traits that lend themselves to particular jobs, such as the ability to handle stress, assertiveness, friendliness, self-confidence, decisiveness, flexibility, willingness to assume responsibility, and similar characteristics. In a good organizational fit, the candidate's personality is well aligned with the cultural aspects of the organization. Administrative selection philosophies have varied over time, as the discussion of 6 specific areas here demonstrates. Administration by gentility, 1789 through 1829. From the time of George Washington's presidency until that of Andrew Jackson, patronage, appointment based on connections and political views, was the primary system for selection in the public sector. Selection by spoils, 1829 through 1883. President Jackson insisted on better representation of all social classes and from those from the West, and thought that rotation of government positions was healthy. Jackson advocated keeping government jobs as simple as possible so that those with modest education would be eligible. He argued that greater political responsiveness would reduce corruption and complacency. Technical merit systems, 1883 to 1912. The Pendleton Act of 1883 signaled a new era in personnel management, although it was more than 50 years before the system evolved into what was comprehensive in federal government, widely adopted across levels of other government, and generally rigorously applied. Expansion of access, 1964 through 1990. Although a few city and state governments were quick to replicate the new federal reform model, the increase in civil service systems was slow. Era of equal opportunity. The era of equal opportunity began in the early 1960s, but did not replace merit but modified its execution and made hiring more complicated. The contemporary selection trends, 1978 through the present. Complaints about the civil service system include rigidity, proceduralism or red tape, isolation from the executive branch, and inadequate accountability. Contemporary trends have emphasized flexibility, speed, integration of selection functions and other management responsibilities, and increased employee accountability for productivity. The longtime values of civil service systems, technical merit and seniority, seem to have experienced countervailing pressures to expand managerial accountability and flexibility. Also, the use of temporary employees rose in significance during the 1990s, a new trend towards the use of term employees. Major changes in recruitment technology have also influenced important trends in selection. Although all values have been explicit in each of these eras, some values have been emphasized at the expense of others. How does the procedure specifically relate to the essential job functions? On one hand, it's important to get good indicators of skills and likely performance. On the other, it's neither appropriate nor legal to pile on job requirements as a screening mechanism. 6 criteria for the selection of methods are reviewed here: reliability, validity, legality, acceptability, efficiency, and effectiveness. Tests that provide consistent results are reliable. An unstructured interview has low reliability because the questions vary from one applicant to the next. When tests make good distinctions among the candidates, they're valid. As interesting as intelligence tests are, they're extremely poor predictors of job success. Some tests are less susceptible to legal challenge than others. Tests may be challenged on the basis of inconsistency, disparate impact, or poor relationship to specific job requirements. Even if tests are legal, another consideration is how well they're accepted by candidates. Candidates expect to fill out application forms, but may be put off by integrity tests. Some tests lend themselves relatively well to the screening of large number of applicants without undue expense and thus are efficient. Effectiveness refers to how well a test functions in either a generic or a targeted purpose within the array of selection methods. Selection processes can be divided into 4 phases of screening, although sometimes phases are combined for convenience or out of necessity. In Phase 1, the procedure emphasizes discerning between the qualified and unqualified candidates. applicant pools typically have a substantial number of individuals who do not meet basic qualifications and whose applications can be put aside. In eliminating candidates, initial qualifications need to be carefully identified, both from the general job description and from those special needs identified for the position in the job posting. In Phase 2, the most highly qualified people are identified and screened. If the initial screening ranks all candidates, it's a simple matter to choose those with the highest scores. In unassembled tests, candidates are ranked only on those items that can be submitted by mail or email: applications, resumes, written work, samples, letters of recommendations, and possibly online or written self-reported assessments. In assembled tests, applicants are required to come to a central location or locations to take general aptitude tests, general mental ability tests, or specific work tests, or provide live work samples in a protected setting. Inevitably, the interview is the centerpiece of this process. Phase 3 results in a single candidate to offer the position to, as well as backup applicants should the individual turn down the offer. Selecting the first choice from the array of candidates may be easy, or in some cases it may be difficult because top candidates seem equally qualified or bring different types of human assets to the position. During Phase 4, the qualifications and abilities of candidates are confirmed after the offer. Many offers are conditional on successful drug tests, medical exams, or even background checks. The 4-phase approach allows for thorough review of applicants and minimal waste of time on unselected candidates. Education and experience evaluations include application forms, cover letters, and resumes. Video resumes have fans among some applicants, but these have yet to catch on in the organizational world, especially in the public sector, where the legal and technical issues they raise are a concern. Video conferencing may be used in the selection process if distance is an issue. Application forms generally run from 1 to 3 pages for job or agency-specific applications, to 5 or 6 pages for the general-purpose forms used by many state governments or large agencies. They also normally provide information about such topics as reasonable accommodation, diversity policies, and veterans points. Finally, applications invariably have certification and authorization statements that must be signed. Not all jobs require application forms. Some substitute a cover letter and a resume, especially for management and executive jobs. Cover letters provide an opportunity for candidates to explain why they feel they're qualified for an advertised positions, and resumes generally provide more specific information about job experience than would fit in an application form. Also, sometimes work samples are requested, such as a written work product or a visual image of a completed project. A number of jobs also require specific licenses, certificates, or endorsements. Education and experience evaluation narrows the candidate pool and promotes fair selection. There are at least 3 types of aptitude and trait tests: psychological, general skills, and general physical ability. Psychological tests examine personality traits and compare them to job requirements. General skills tests provide information about abilities or aptitudes in areas such as reading, mathematics, abstract thinking, spelling, language use, general problem solving, judgment, proofreading, and memory. When a general physical ability is a major part of the job, as it is for public safety personnel, tests of physical ability, like strength, agility, and eyesight, may be part of a battery of tests used to determine initial job qualification. However, medical, physical, and eyesight examinations are done after a conditional offer has been extended, but before employment. Performance tests directly assess the skills necessary for a specific job. Although tests based on single-factor performance models are somewhat useful and dominated early personnel research and practice, the multi-factor nature of performance is better appreciated today. Some jobs involve specific physical skills, such as typing or keyboarding or equipment operation, that can be tested. Many job-related knowledge tests use multiple choice, true, false, or short answer formats. Sometimes video versions of the tests are administered. Occasionally, an essay or an oral presentation is analyzed in the first screening. Knowledge-based tests are also commonly utilized in promotional hiring in public safety and technical positions. Job-related skills may be tested through work samples or job simulations. Those applicants tested are required to produce samples of a work or demonstrate their skills in a series of simulated activities, generally known as assessment centers. Work samples and assessment centers generally are quite effective, but are not often used as initial screening devices because of the substantial time and cost involved in customized screening. They're used more commonly as part of the process to review the narrowed pool that goes through an interview process for promotional purposes. Licensure, general aptitude, and performance tests have proliferated over the years. More testing methods and higher quality testing methods can substantially increase the likelihood of successful hires. Many critics, however, have called for more selection flexibility and a greater reliance on background, education, and experience reviews than on aptitude and performance tests. The reasons are easy to discern. Lengthy testing protocols are expensive to administer and discourage some qualified job seekers from applying. Testing often slows the employment process as applicants wait for test dates and organizations wait for scores. This is particularly true in low unemployment economy. A challenge in using standardized tests is the changing nature of contemporary work. Compared with the past, jobs in general today tend to be broader, change more frequently, require more interpersonal and team skills, need more creativity and self-initiative, and have more demanding performance standards with broader skill sets required. There's no simple rule of thumb for which or how many tests to use. Interviewing and reference checks are major responsibilities for the hiring managers and involve discretion. Although this discretion is important, unstructured interviews and haphazard reference checks frequently result in low validity, wasted resources, frustrated candidates, and illegal practices. Generally speaking, only structured interviews that we'll describe in this presentation have high validity. It's especially important to conduct high-quality interviews and reference checks given the trend towards decreasing use of tests. The first issue is deciding who will conduct the interview. The four options are 1. The supervisor, 2. The human resource department or a third party, 3. A panel or committee, and 4. A series of interviews, who may include immediate supervisors, higher-level supervisors, a committee, a colleague forum, and clients. Although the practice is not common in the public sector outside academics, sometimes the hiring unit acts as the hiring committee due to the increasingly collaborative approach towards work today. For entry-level professional positions, selection panels are frequently used to enhance the diversity of opinions about candidates. Candidates vying for senior or professional positions often have separate interviews with an advisory selection panel and with the hiring supervisor who makes the final decision. A second critical question is that of whom to interview. Public sector employment involves two different approaches. One approach is to interview all candidates who meet minimum qualifications, but because this is time-consuming for interviewers and may unnecessarily inflate the hopes of candidates, it's less commonly used of the two. When the applicant pool is small and multiple positions are open, or when the time of interviewers is available, however, such an option might make sense. In other cases, the candidate pool may lack exceptional candidates, and the use of more extensive interviewing may be the logical way to try to discover hidden talent. By far the most frequently used approach, however, is to interview only the most qualified people. At one time, the Rule of Three, promulgated by the Civil Service Commission, was commonly followed. It restricted hiring authorities to interviewing the top 3 candidates who were certified. This practice was used to keep much lower ranked eligibles from being selected because of fears of political interference or managerial cronyism. This injunction is still in place in many federal agencies, although it's much criticized. In many civil service systems, the allowable number to be certified is often expanded to 4, 5, or 6, and sometimes to the top tier. Today, the tendency is to give hiring authorities discretion to interview any number it wishes and to determine minimum qualifications needed for meeting that threshold, making the eligible and certified lists identical. Nonetheless, there are practical reasons to restrict interviewing. In most cases, the top 3 or 4 candidates are obvious, and interviewing more is unlikely to be productive. Where discretion exists, hiring authorities can consider alternative methods. Online or telephone interviews, or both, can rapidly provide a good deal of information and answer many preliminary questions. Likewise, video conferencing can precede on-site interviews and whittle down the application field. Reference checks can be done before the interview process to gather information to help select the most desirable candidates to invite. Steps to consider in preparing for and conducting a structured interview are as follows. Plan how it should proceed. Who will meet the applicants? Where will people wait if they do not proceed directly to the interview? Who will explain the general process to be used? If there's more than one interviewer, who will ask which questions? Explain basic facts about the position to the candidate, which department, what division or unit, and the supervisor. Review job responsibilities. Use the position description and advertisements as guides to ensure that the focus is on essential job functions. In addition, include information about some of the job challenges and opportunities as part of a realistic preview. Hold the interview in a private setting in which distractions are unlikely. Concentrate on listening to the candidate's answers and take notes. Also, be sure that the candidate has opportunities to ask questions during the interview. If only one such opportunity exists, and it's at the end of the interview, then the candidate may feel rushed if the interview ends up using most of the allotted time. Use a specific list of written questions that are asked of all candidates, ensuring the questions have a logical sequence. This list should be reviewed in advance and circulated to relevant parties to ensure balance and appropriateness. In many cases, the Human Resource Department must approve questions in advance. Use behaviorally anchored questions, or behavior-based questions, relating past experience to the current position, situational judgment questions to probe thinking processes, or work samples as part of the process. Be careful that no oral commitments or suggestions about employment prospects are made. Be prepared to give candidates an estimate of when they will receive feedback. Complete the evaluation notes while impressions are fresh, preferably immediately after the interview. Use a predetermined rating system in evaluating answers to questions. To comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, be prepared to make accommodations for applicants on request. Even if applicants do not request accommodations for the interview, it's best to ask all individuals, can you perform the essential functions of this position with or without a reasonable accommodation? If an accommodation is needed, then consult with human resource specialists. Having to provide accommodation is not an acceptable reason for declining to offer an individual employment. Finally, it's important that interviewers keep questions focused on the job. However, when the testing process is meant to be relatively comprehensive, and it's for professional or executive positions, unstructured interviews may be useful for gaining an understanding of candidate fit. Such interviews are typical in national searches in which candidates are brought in from around the country for 1 or more days' worth of meetings and discussions. While the structured interview is conducted early in the process, other informal meetings allow for unstructured interview settings. Often, in larger interview protocols, shared meals offer prime opportunities for conversation. Also, courtesy appointments with executives and experts outside the hiring process, group or public meetings, and meetings with outside constituents is also normally unstructured. It is common for such groups to provide feedback to the hiring manager or panel. Although such unstructured interviews do randomly cover technical competence, those evaluating applicants are likely to be responding to characteristics such as energy level, social ability, organizational fit, listening ability, and charm. Such information is most useful when the technical competence of the candidate is relatively equally balanced. Most frequently, the supervisor for the position makes the final selection. Supervisors should not overturn search committee recommendations lightly in the selection process. Although these committees or whole departments never technically hire candidates, their decisions may be definitive. The person with the highest score on the required test should get the position. For some positions requiring minimum or no qualifications, or where competition for qualified staff is particularly fierce, the hiring authority may essentially be delegated to the Human Resource Department so that immediate selection may take place. Sometimes the interview procedure leaves the supervisor or the search committee bewildered about who the best candidate is. In such cases, a second round of interviews may be a solution. The actual hiring normally begins with an informal phone call. Is the person still interested in the position? Does she understand what the salary is? Does she have any final questions? For entry-level positions, there's usually little ability to negotiate salary or working conditions. Senior level and competitive positions may provide some flexibility. Both the organization and the candidate should have a clear idea of how long the agency is willing to wait for the candidate's decision. A period of at least several days seems to be reasonable. Once the candidate orally accepts the position, a letter to confirm the offer, a letter of intent, usually follows. The person is then generally asked to report to the work site to complete employment forms. Only when the organization is confident that the position has been filled are letters or calls made to those interviewed but not selected to inform them that the position has been filled. One significant variation exists when a physical exam or drug test is part of the hiring process, but is conducted after the offer. An offer of employment is then contingent. The final part of the hiring process is the documentation of the process itself. Generally, the Human Resource Department or Affirmative Action Office will require a form be filled out that confirms the identities of the eligible individuals and the reasons for selection and non-selection. Such tests are sometimes allowed or required for security purposes or public safety. Although universal drug testing is generally illegal for most positions, it is legal for those conveying passengers and involved in public safety positions. Law enforcement and correction positions also frequently require extensive background checks and sometimes polygraph examinations, although the questions asked must be carefully screened for job relevance. Generally, these tests are conducted after an offer but before employment is finalized. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008, the first civil rights law of the new century, protects workers from having to provide genetic information prior to employment or enrollment in health insurance plans. Even after the person has accepted a position and documentation on the hiring process has been filed, the selection process is not over. All candidates interviewed or, in some senior level cases, all persons who applied should be informed that a decision has been made. Several strategic human resource management issues flow directly from the hiring process. First, the supervisor needs to begin to get ready for the new hire's arrival and integration into the organization. This process is called onboarding. It begins with a review of what the new employee will need to be successful and to feel like a valued member of the organization. Next, what are the plans for orientation and training? Orientation includes sessions that inform the new employee of general policies and benefits and provides familiarization with facilities. Training provides specific instruction on job-related processes and equipment. The workloads of new employees should be reduced initially whenever possible. They should be informed accordingly. Will the training be conducted by a training department and be part of an established program, or will it be done by a supervisor or an in-house instructor? Although on-the-job training has the virtues of relevance and immediacy when done properly, it is frequently completed in an excessively casual manner that really could be called "you're more on your own" than training. A related option to consider is mentoring. Who will make sure that a new employee is introduced to people after the first day, answer questions about the job and culture of the organization, and simply take special interest in the new person's well-being? The initial period is the most critical for preventing early turnover, as well as in establishing a positive bond between the employee and the agency. New employees who realize that the necessary training and support are not being provided are wise to ask for it. Finally, the probationary period itself, where it exists, can be a key part of the selection function. Most organizations set probationary periods at 6 months to 1 year, although the Canadian government allows up to 36 months in some fields of employment. Generally, termination during probation is difficult to challenge as long as it's for non-discriminatory reasons. Mediocre performance is usually grounds for dismissal, and standards of proof may be minimal. This means that supervisors have an exceptional opportunity, although some let the probationary period elapse as the candidate gets up to speed. By setting tough standards for probationary employees as an extension of a rigorous selection process, an agency may avoid future performance problems. The paradox of probation is that it may be the best technique, but for some reasons, some employers may not take it seriously.